So next up, I want to turn it over to Abby Cassario from Michigan State, who will talk about conviction cascades.
Hi, thank you all so much for having us today. I'm really excited to talk with you all about some ongoing research co-authored with my advisor, Mark Brandt, on moral conviction transmitting through belief system ties. So when I'm referring to moral conviction, what I'm referring to is the meta-perception that an attitude or an identity reflects one's core sense of right versus wrong. And importantly, moral conviction varies both by attitude, so I may moralize my attitude towards gay marriage, but not the Republican Party, and by person. So while I don't moralize my attitude towards the Republican Party, Mark might. And moral conviction has received a lot of attention in the social scientific literature over the last decade or so. It's emerged as a really important predictor of outcomes that we care about, like the willingness to compromise on political issues, how people view outpartisans, whether they derogate them or whether they're willing to engage in social interactions with them or not. And it's a key predictor of whether protests turn violent, as well as an ingredient in political sectarianism. But moralization, which we define as the process by which an attitude or an identity attains moral relevance to an individual, is what we're going to focus on here in this talk, which is a slightly different phenomenon. And moralization remains an area of ongoing research that is poorly understood in the literature. There have been attempts to apply theories of moral judgment to understanding attitude moralization. So people have tested whether implicit perceptions of harm or incidental emotion consistently predict attitude moralization. And while in some studies these things emerge as important predictors, in other studies they don't. But there has been some really important recent advancements on this topic, and recent research has uncovered things that do seem to consistently predict moralization. One of those things seems to be consciously experienced emotional reactions that are directly tied to the relevant attitude. Another thing is moral values that are tied directly to the attitude, as well as explicit perceptions of harm, again, directly related to the attitude. So all of these features, while they're important, share that they focus on intra-attitude features, or features of the attitude that we're studying itself. Here, we propose a different starting point. So moral conviction is an explicitly reported metacognitive feature of an attitude. And because of this, we argue that it's also likely influenced by inter-attitude features, or the features of other attitudes to which the attitude you're interested in is tied. And to begin our theorizing, we start with theories of belief systems and cognitive consistency. And we suggest that moral conviction spreads through connected elements in a belief system over time. So before I dive into things here, I want to start off with a couple of conceptual definitions with two phrases that I'm going to use a lot. One is belief system, and when I refer to a belief system, what I'm referring to is a network of causally connected attitudes and identities that exist within a person's head and that they use to make sense of the political and social world. The other is cognitive consistency. And when I'm referring to cognitive consistency, what I'm referring to is the desire for people to have consistent attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. And when these things are in conflict, we tend to feel psychological discomfort. So we want to avoid having these things conflict. So the idea of this project is that perceiving a strongly moralized attitude as closely connected to a non-moralized or weakly moralized attitude creates dissonance. So why would one attitude that is super highly moralized be so closely connected to another attitude, and that attitude being viewed as morally irrelevant? And we argue that that creates a kind of psychological discomfort that people are going to want to find a way to deal with. And we argue that one way people deal with this dissonance, perhaps the most common way, since we know that when things become moralized, they tend to stay moralized, is to moralize the closely connected attitude. And then moral conviction is spreading from that highly moralized attitude to the closely connected, initially non-moralized or weakly moralized attitude. So to start off, we wanted to just see what would happen theoretically if things are working out the way they should with our theory. So what we do is we build a computational model, and we adapt a dynamic Ising model, which is a model of network dynamics over time, for the 0-1 domain, where 0 represents an attitude or a node in our networks being non-moralized, and 1 represents the attitude being moralized. We then model transmission of moral conviction from one patient node through a belief system over 5 time points. So our first study is actually a simulation study. What we did is we implemented this model in code, looking at how moral conviction spreads from a patient node in a network through the rest of the network if our theory is behaving as we expect it to. So what we do is we craft hypothetical belief systems with weak, moderate, and strong connectivity between the attitudes. And we simulate 1,000 networks for each of these 6 types of belief systems over 5 time points. So we're simulating networks that are fully connected or consist of social and economic attitude neighborhoods of 3 different kinds of connectivity, weak, moderate, and strong. And that's how we get 6 types of networks. And then we look at whether our networks are behaving the way they should in line with the math of our theory. So we expect to observe that moral conviction spreads from that patient node through the network over time. And that spread should be more efficient in belief systems where attitudes are closely connected to one another. So on this graph, what you'll see on the x-axis is time point. So from our first time point to our 5th time point. And on the y-axis, you're going to see the proportion of moralized nodes in these simulations. Starting on the left, we see simulations in weakly connected belief systems, in the middle in moderately connected belief systems, and on the right in strongly connected belief systems. And then the type of belief system is coded by color. So fully connected belief systems are in red, and belief systems with distinct social and economic attitude neighborhoods are in blue. And what you can see here is that moral conviction is spreading in all of these networks, but spread is much more efficient in our fully connected our fully connected network where all connections are present. So in these densely connected networks with all attitudes connected to one another, we see more efficient spread of moral conviction. And this is just another way of presenting these results. What I did here was I just pulled one simulated belief system of full connection of weak, moderate, and strong connectivity at the beginning of our simulations at time 1 and at the end of our simulations at time 5. And again, what you can see is that that transmission of moral conviction from the patient node to the rest of the network is more efficient and more in the more strongly connected network. So you'll see that on the bottom right. Now looking at our belief systems with distinct social and economic attitude neighborhoods. And here, we still see transmission from that patient node over time, and we still see it being more efficient when attitudes are more closely connected. But the spread is not quite as complete as we saw when all attitudes were tied to one another. So conclusions from our simulation study, we see that moral conviction is spreading through belief systems over time, and that moral conviction is spreading more efficiently through dense belief systems. So next, we wanted to begin to get some empirical evidence on whether this is happening in real belief systems. So what we did is we conducted 3 observational panel studies. In the first time point in these panel studies, we measured individuals' belief systems using the conceptual similarity task at time 1. Then at all of our follow-up time points, we measured moral conviction using Skitka's 2-item measure of moral conviction. And importantly, our first study had 3 time points, and our next 2 studies had 2 time points. So this is what I'm referring to when I refer to crafting a belief system with the conceptual similarity task. What we do is we present respondents with pairs of attitudes and identities that tend to go together or not to go together in American politics. And we counterbalance whether these things align or conflict. And then we have respondents rate on a 10-point Likert scale ranging from 1, not at all likely, to 7, very likely, how likely it is that somebody holds both of these attitudes or identities. And since these ratings are at the respondent level, what we can do is we can craft individual level belief systems for each respondent. Here, because we're interested in the strength of the tie rather than the direction, what we do is we center the scale so that 4 becomes 0, and rescale it so that we're capturing the strength of the tie by folding it over and taking the absolute value. So 4 is the strongest possible connection here. And when we do that, what we see are these individual belief systems that you can see in the figure below, where each person has a different tie between the elements of their belief system. So then we can take those belief systems and use them to predict things that we care about, like the spread of moral conviction based on network structure over time. So to test our predictions, to test that first prediction that moral conviction should spread from a patient node through a belief system over time, we fit multi-level models where we regress time to moral conviction for the first attitude in the pair at the second time point, on time 1 moral conviction for the first attitude at the first time point, moral conviction for the second attitude in the pair at the first time point, and the tie between the 2 the two attitudes. And then the term of interest, which is the interaction between the time one moral conviction for the second attitude and the strength of the tie between the attitude. We within-person center all of our predictors because we're interested in examining within-person change in attitude moralization. And then second, to test our prediction that dense belief systems should be more moralized belief systems because moral conviction spreads more rapidly through dense networks, we just do a cross-sectional analysis where we calculate average belief system moralization and belief system density, and we regress belief system moral conviction on belief system density. And, we would predict that those with denser belief systems have more moralized belief systems. So in this figure, what you can see on the x-axis is the moral conviction at time one of that second attitude in the pair. And on the y-axis, you can see the moral conviction at the later time point of the first attitude in the pair. And this is controlling for the previous moralization of the first attitude. So I just wanted to note that. And when you look at the far right corner of the x-axis, for highly connected attitudes, what we see is that when an attitude is highly moralized, it does predict increased moralization of the other attitude at the later time point. So this does suggest that moral conviction is spreading between these closely connected nodes over time. And then moving on to our density prediction, we do see that when belief systems are denser and have more connections, the belief system also tends to be more moralized, suggesting that these Conversian ideologues with dense belief systems also tend to have moralized belief systems. So conclusions from our empirical studies, we see that moral conviction does spread through belief systems over time in line with our first prediction, and that dense belief systems tend to be highly moralized belief systems in line with our second prediction. One reason that I'm really excited about this area of research is that there are some really interesting future directions. And one is that changes in moralization of belief systems over time is something that we might expect as changes in belief systems on average adjust to changing political contexts. So our theory predicts and our empirical studies show that moral conviction transmits more efficiently through these dense networks. And a long literature in political behavior has suggested that partisan and ideological sorting are increasing over time. So we might expect that at the population level, that this increasing connectivity and consistency of attitudes would lead to denser belief systems and thus more moralized belief systems. So this is an exploratory analysis of the average connection or density of sample average political belief systems crafted from ANES data over time. And what you can see moving from 1984 to 2020 is a rapid increase in the connectivity of sample average belief systems. And what our theory would predict is that as these belief systems become more interconnected, we would also expect them to become more moralized as more attitudes are tied to one another and moral conviction can transmit more rapidly. So in conclusion, this study has forwarded the idea that inner attitude structure is an important feature that predicts attitude moralization as people seek to hold consistent moral beliefs. And we found support for these predictions in one simulation study and 3 observational studies. I'm really excited about this area of research because there are broader societal and theoretical implications. One is that inner attitude structure is an important but overlooked feature in predicting attitude moralization. Another, which is what I just talked about, is that ideologues with dense and fully connected belief systems may more efficiently transmit moral conviction between attitudes and be more likely to have more highly moralized belief systems. And we know that ideologues are also the people that tend to participate in politics and hold political power. Also, at the population level, as more political attitudes become aligned and connected for more people, we might expect that there's more potential for more individuals to have these highly moralized and sectarian belief systems. And finally, this is an area of ongoing research, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention some limitations. And one is that none of our studies were, strictly speaking, optimized for causal inference. So we do within-person center our analyses in our empirical studies, which takes care of a lot of confounding, but not all of it. And one thing that I'm really excited to do in the future is experimentally creating ties between moralized and non-moralized attitudes to causally test whether that tie itself is transmitting moral conviction between attitudes. So thank you so much for your time, and I'm excited to hear your feedback.
Great, thanks. You probably have time for one question. I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and ask one quick question myself. So I'm reading through my former advisor Keith Payne's book, who'll be speaking later today, and one of the things he mentions is the work on the fact that ideology for many people is not necessarily always internally coherent or consistent within a
Mhm.
person. I'm just
Yeah.
curious. I mean, I take part of what you and Mark and your team are doing is to try to look at variability in those ideologies within person. But
Mhm.
I'm curious if you could speak more to the possibility that for some folks, ideology is not very internally coherent.
Yeah, that's such a great point. So I think one thing that makes our measure really special is that when we're doing these conceptual similarity belief system studies, we can capture that at the individual level. So what we might expect to observe is maybe like there's going to be a significant portion of people who don't have these interconnected belief systems. And if you go back and we can like look at our graph of belief system density, that is what we see. There are some people that have really connected belief systems, some that have like not at all connected belief systems, and a lot that are in this like low moderate range. Um, so I think that's a really great point. And then another thing that I think would be really interesting to maybe build into the model is maybe some kind of penalty term where the spread stops when positions are inconsistent. And that's like a future direction we should probably consider.
Any more questions? One more question from either online or in person. I do see one online. So Lauren O'Rourke asks, I would imagine there will be reach a point where moral convictions become too rigid. Where do you think we can go from here?
Um, so could you explain on or like expand a little bit on what you mean by rigid? Do you mean like it's normatively problematic when things are super moralized, or do you mean something else?
Um, Lauren, do you care to follow up on your comment? Oh,
Yeah, that's
okay.
an excellent question. No, that totally makes sense. I think something that is really promising about this area of research is that it suggests that maybe our polarization interventions and our interventions trying to reduce sectarianism and hypermoralization um, they might not be as effective if we're only intervening on like one attitude in these larger networks. And I think that's something that our approach allows us to do is once we obtain these individual belief systems, we can intervene on a whole portion of that network that's likely to be moralized. And maybe we might see more lasting change because there's not other attitudes that are connected to that targeted attitude to draw it back into the moral domain. So maybe we need to like intervene on these whole moralized kind of neighborhoods. And that would be kind of a more efficient way to like make people long-term less moralized in their thinking overall. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it's kind of what came to mind. So thanks so much.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the fascinating talk.